Hello, and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a profitable and sustainable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today I had the pleasure of interviewing Eric McNeilly. Now, Eric is a well-respected expert in the dairy industry, really at a global scale. He's a Michigan native that grew up on a dairy farm in central Michigan and has had 35 years of dairy management experience. The last 24 of those years, he's had the opportunity to share his experiences with dairy farms around the world through his consulting company that specialized in coaching people, management, labor efficiency, developing systems, and protocols. He helped design and manage over 14 different dairy operations throughout the US, Russia, and China. More recently, in 2017, Eric joined Alta Genetics and has had multiple global roles with the company. Today, his role with Alta is the International Premier Account Manager, traveling all around the world, teaching Alta's clients how to manage their farms more effectively. That work has taken him to over 6 continents and 22 countries with Alta so far since 2017. And we're going to talk a little bit today about managing farms across different cultures, across different climates, and across different countries. Eric shares a lot of wisdom in this episode, not just if you're a dairy farmer, but for managing any sort of business in agriculture. He goes into detail about labor management, working through different cultural differences. And I think whether you're in the dairy industry or in a different sector of agriculture, there's a lot to glean from this episode with Eric. So please listen carefully to the nuggets of wisdom from Eric McNeilly. Why don't you start out giving some background and some context around that, going back to how you first got into the industry and your early days getting to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I was born and raised on a dairy here in central Michigan. Our family migrated from Ireland in the early 1800s, 1885. They settled here in this area where I live now. And my oldest sister, she still farms on that family farm today. And where I'm at now, where I live, is we moved here. Our family moved here in like 1969, and my dad came here from the family farm, and he started his own farm here. So I bought this farm from my mom after my dad passed away, and So I live where I live now is where I was born and raised, and so we had purebred cattle. We milked about 80 cows, and we sold embryos and bulls around the world when I was younger. And so I was involved with the Holstein Association in high school and junior high and such. I was involved in 4-H and later in FFA, and so I really had a passion for purebred cattle and showing cattle and doing that at a young age. I sold my first bull to the AI industry when I was 14.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that kind of got my teeth into it. And my dad he'd proven bulls during my younger years. He'd collect semen here on bulls, and we'd sell semen around the United States and proved out bulls of our own. And so I've been involved with that side of it for my whole life. And when I was just out of high school, I was trying to decide whether I wanted to go to work on a large dairy or go to veterinary school. And because I wanted to learn more about cows and people, and opted to work on a large dairy because sitting in a classroom really didn't appeal to me. I was more of a guy that wanted to be out and about and, getting stuck into things. So I looked at dairies at that time, larger dairies in the United States at that time. It was the late 80s, early 90s. Would have been in Arizona, California, and Georgia is where I ended up. It was a large dairy there that came over from Ireland. Mastock was the name of the farm. And what interested me there was they had bought the Dream Street herd, which is a large registered herd, and so I was interested in the registered cattle. So they actually started up dairies for a prince in Saudi Arabia. The dairy now is called Al Marai, and so that's how I got involved with large scale dairy. And so from there I worked my way up and I guess it's kind of gets me to where I am today. But I don't know how much more detail you want to go into that. But
one thing that I think is really interesting about you is you've had experiences being involved in short term in large scale dairies that were in troubled situations, right? Why don't we go there a little bit and talk about some of those experiences? And I think what would be valuable for the audience is to understand, maybe from your perspective, how they got to the bad situation they were in, and then what you did in some of those instances to either turn them around or get them to the point where they could be resold again.
So a little bit more about the background. And so while I was in Georgia, I got to meet a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tom Furman. He was a consulting veterinarian out of Arizona, and Dennis Armstrong, who was he was an engineer. Actually, went to school here in Michigan at Michigan State University. He was a professor out in Arizona. So I got to meet those guys. And so while I was in Georgia, what I wanted to accomplish was to learn more about cows and people. And the opportunity I had was to work under those guys, the Dennis Armstrongs, the Tom Furmans, and eventually Jake Martin, who came in. He is now an engineer out of Florida. So I got to learn from those guys hands-on, and as they came, I just sucked as much knowledge as I could out of them. Dennis Armstrong taught me how to manage a dairy or manage a parlor, get it more efficient with a clipboard and a stopwatch. And, Tom Furman, what I learned from him was the people side and also the cow side. So my time there was, to me, it was set the groundwork for where I ended up later in life. At the time, didn't realize it. But, I worked with people from around the world, had to learn and understand different cultures and, managed different people. And so as that grew, I came back, we came back home, I think in 1995 or 6, somewhere in there. And my wife and we'd gotten married and moved back to Michigan and learned right away that, Dad and I had two different ideas. I was ready to go and he was wanting to, just kind of take things a little easy. I came from managing 7,000 cows and 54 employees back to, the 100 cow dairy that we had. And it's just a whole different mindset. And we had two different ideas. And so at that time in Michigan, there were some dairies that were starting up and wanting to expand and go different routes. And so with my experiences I had in Georgia, we kind of went out on our own and reconnected later on with Tom Furman and created Dairy Works. But some of the things that we got involved with then were coming onto dairies and just, like you had said, is whether it's crises management, taking over restructuring the dairies or just doing trainings. And so I had the opportunity to do that for about 20 some years before coming to work with Alta Genetics and traveled around the U.S. to do that. So your question on that regard would be that, these dairies, it varied, depending on whether it was from people management or just financial, burdens they got involved with that we'd come in and help them, restructure, reorganize. And some of those, we were just able to work with the bank and just work it through. But in other situations, we were able to help, take things to the next level. So
what were the differences in the people that you worked with, whether that be the bank or the farm owner themselves? How did that change what you were doing on the farm, and what sort of different aspects of that relationship did you maybe enjoy or not enjoy so much?
Didn't enjoy working with the banks because it was always not in a situation that was friendly, but really enjoyed working with the people. And on the farms, even in a couple of situations where they were, in the crises part of as far as the bank side of it, again, learned some things during that time that I was able to use later in life. Didn't really know that at the time either. But I think with the what I enjoyed the most was working with the dairymen on the farms, and not so much on on the banking side, because it's not fun. So, do
you have any really crazy stories about what you found that you could share with us when you first got on some of those farms?
Crazy stories. I got a lot of stories, I guess. Yeah, like you said early on in this conversation, I guess maybe more detail. What kind of crazy stories would you be thinking of? I mean, what kind of?
Maybe from a management standpoint, where you're just like, how do you milk this many cows and not understand this aspect or something like that?
What I learned early on when I went from Michigan down to Georgia, the farm that we had in Michigan, we had 80 cows, 100 cows. So that was the size of one pen in that dairy that I managed. We were up to 3,500 milking cows when I left there on one site. We had 3 locations. And so, what I learned, early on is that a cow is a cow, whether you're milking 100 cows or 10,000. And, it's just a matter of your management systems and such change with that. So you go from doing everything on your own on a smaller dairy setting, where you're wearing you have a banker hat on, you have a management hat on, you have a cropping hat on, to larger scale where you're more specialized. And so, some of the stories, I guess, would be, going to these larger dairies where they're, again, like you said, how can you milk this many cows and not understand X, Y, and Z? And, just helping them recognize the opportunity for, let's say, people management, and restructuring that and getting more out of that side of it. They may be great at business, but they didn't really understand, how to make a parlor, turn out more cows, for example, or not. So I don't know if that's kind of fulfills your stories, but I mean, I could get into a lot more details if you want. But
I guess how in your mind did some of those people get to that size with having those big gaps still?
Well, I think with in some situations they got large in spite of themselves, and that they really understood the economical side of it as far as the banking side of it, and were good at the lending of the money and handling it and managing that. But yeah, it's like some of the dairies were just some of the basic fundamentals were, hey, if we reorganize a little bit and put in a system of routines and protocols, that we take that even to the next level further. That's something I learned early on, is that the real benefit from that, your organizing work and such. I do like to share knowledge, and then with that, if I, like when we were baling hay here at home as a kid, if you would teach somebody how to put a bale on the elevator correctly, it made everybody's job and everybody's life easier. And so taking that experience and saying, okay, if we could, do X, Y, or Z on a farm and share that knowledge with individuals, and it makes your life easier. So for me, I'm kind of lazy at managing people or managing. So I'd rather the more knowledge I could share, the less work I have to do. Right. So if I could share my knowledge and get other people to get things done and then work on the bigger picture, that was more exciting to me. So
the key to you for people management is knowledge sharing and getting them interested in understanding the job that they're supposed to do.
Well, absolutely. If they understand the why and the how, more importantly, the why, because we can teach them the how, but why do we do what we do, and why is it important, and why is it meaningful to the operation or the individual?
So how did you portray that coming into some of these crisis situations that you dealt with? Usually, and in my experience, I've been through this experience, and the culture is usually completely horrendous, right? On those farms, everyone knows it's a sinking ship. Nobody's happy to be there, but they still are. So how do you maybe change that culture or reignite that interest to learn in the people that are left?
Well, yeah, it's a good question in that regard. So, really most of my time was spent on the majority of my time. I only had a few of these situations where they were, the bank deals, but most of what I came into was a dairyman that wanted to take their dairy to the next level, or they were in a situation where, we need to restructure, reorganize, and need some help doing that, don't know how. And so, in those situations, you'd have the culture of somebody, the employees may be disgruntled as far as that goes, or frustrated because they could see what needed to be done, but really couldn't get it done. So when you come in as an outsider, you really have that opportunity, because you have the owner's ear, and you can, meld those two cultures and help take that to the next level. So it's really a matter of, again, once you people, I think as a whole, humans want to have structure. They want to know the expectations of what needs to be done, and the more they can get that, the better. Now, it can be taken to the other extreme to where they get, lackadaisical as well. But it's a matter of, the management being able to help guide that and take that to that level. So it really is about putting systems, routines, and protocols in place. It's just that.
That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
So with that, you were talking that you've been involved in operations and in your current role with Alta go all over the world. What are the big challenges you see maybe with cultural differences or cultural differences or geographical differences? Every area is a little different. Every culture is different. How do you still build a good operation around that if you're coming from the outside?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What I see, around the world, obviously there's differences, right? I mean, there's a difference between, an operation in Siberia than there is in, South Africa or even Saudi Arabia or, the Ukraine or you name it. And so those are different, right? So, the structure of the facilities is going to be a little different. The culture obviously will be different. So what I learned early on with not only at MassDoc way back in my early days, but again in Russia, when I was doing work in Russia before Alta, that I could see how wars were started through miscommunication and cultural differences in that. So it's really important for communications to be clear and, make it so you understand the culture, and understanding that and trying to, work with that diplomatically as well. There is some diplomacy involved with that, but also, there's certain things that, on basic fundamentals of cows that can't be changed, right? So the one thing about a cow is that she's the same, whether she's in wherever she is in the world. They all have four stomachs, right? And they all are geared to, produce milk. And so understanding those basic, fundamentals and needs, that's the same no matter where you are in the world.
So somebody that is interested in a role like what you've had in the past or what you have today, what words of advice would you give them on core skills that they really need to master to be able to do those positions well?
Well, I think, communication is very critical, obviously, being able to communicate. One thing I've talked with my daughter about, and, I had advice from, others in my lifetime, was that, that's going to be critical, is that you can be the smartest guy in the room or the smartest guy in the world, but if you can't communicate that, train that, or, help people understand that, you're, what good is the skills that you have acquired? So understanding, good communications and being able to convey those to individuals. And so I think that'd be one. The other is going to be, for what I do, is you're going to have to, have the ability to travel. And so, one of the great things is that we get to see the world. The bad thing is we're not there long. And so, we would like to spend a little time and sightsee, but we don't usually get that opportunity. So you got to be flexible and, be willing to travel. And a lot of people ask me, that's got to be terrible, flying. Well, driving isn't fun either, right? So, whether you drive or fly, for me, we fly. Then there'll be a point, I'm sure, that we'll say, okay, enough's enough. Be like kind of like Forrest Gump, and say, okay, I've ran that far, I'm done now. But at this point in time, it's so you got to be willing to travel, and have the ability to communicate and understand cultures. I think that's a critical thing. Is that if you come in with a mindset that it's the U.S. way or no way, it's not going to work. So, but you have to understand the basic fundamentals of a cow too, right? So, and get her needs met no matter where she is in the world.
Let's pivot a little bit to what you're currently doing in your current role with Alta. You want to go in a little bit more depth, what that looks like, and I guess why you chose to go from what you were doing more in the consulting role privately versus going to work for a very well-known company in the industry like Alta.
Yeah, no, I think that's, again, another good question. So, why did I seek this out? So when I was doing work in the U.S. and around, I think I met up with you once in Coopersville there. I'd run into farms all the time that they'd say, we got this company called Alta. They provide this consulting, if we are a larger account for them. And, we don't have to pay as, the same fees and such. And so one of the things that was challenging on my side is that, on a private side, it's great that you're self-employed, but you are self-employed, and you got to keep getting those gigs after gig, and then it's collecting the money, and so that became challenging at times, with especially working in foreign markets and trying to, trying to get your money back out, and so, as I got connected with Alta and really started looking at what they're doing, and I thought, this is looks like kind of fun, and so yeah, that's kind of how I got into that. And so what my role is with Alta is very similar to what, I've done over the last, 20 some years. Now, I don't stay on a farm like I used to, like when I met you in Coopersville there, I'd stay there and just, help fix that and get it to, get it going. And it may take, a month, it may take 6 months. Now it's, you go to the farm and you give advice and you go to the next one. What we do is we work with, ours are all distributor markets that we're working with, that I'm working with now. And so we have a sales manager responsible for a set of countries. And then we have a distributor in each one of those countries. And so what I do is I come in and work with the two of them. And, we'll go to these larger dairies and I look for opportunities. I don't sell them the product. Sure, we promote, and they'd love to, we'd love to have all the customers or everybody that's listening to this, if they're breeding milking cows, that they use Alta Genetics. But, if they don't, I still do my job. And so what I look for on those farms is I look at the cows, calves, breeding, feeding, milking. I look at the whole operation and look for opportunities to help them get to the next level. And I'm not there to sell them semen. I'm not there to sell them, our products. I'm there to, strictly as an outsider, to added value back to, potentially them being a customer. And so it's real interesting because we get to see so many different, varies of dairies around the world. So
now with that role, how is your interaction with data and technology changed over time?
Oh, it's I think that's, I started out in, in Georgia. Well, actually, here on the farm, we have a dairy wheel. The wheel.
Oh yeah, the wheel.
Yeah, we had the wheel.
They're going to be in museums soon, right?
Yeah,
if they're not already.
I actually just got another one put back on our wall here for my daughter. But so we had the dairy wheel, and that's how we kept track of records. And so anyway, went to Georgia, and when I first got involved in Georgia, the computers were just coming out. PC Dart was kind of going then, but not really full swing. So we had what we call a cow card, and on a cow card, that card had the cow's number and all the information on the cow, date of birth or calving dates and all that sort of thing. So when we bred the cow, we had to record it on that cow card. So we had 3,500 cards. Now there might be multiple cards. So I went from that to, a PC Dart or dairy comp where I couldn't see anything. Right. So, and then from that, we went to, handhelds, where you have a handheld scanners and such. And now, to the level that we're getting into now, it's just technology is very, very important in where we're going in the industry. Now we have, Fitbit for cows where we're monitoring their, all their ruminations and that sort of thing. And I think technology is going to play a huge role. It does, and it has, and it's going to continue to do that, just getting us to the next level. Where I think that this industry is going is more towards a cow that is more efficient. How can we get more, not necessarily more milk or fat out of her, but an efficient amount and efficiently in what she consumes. And so those are all going to be monitored even more closely as we go forward, and, what's coming out of her, what's going into her. And, how can we make that cow more efficient? So
definitely makes sense from a financial standpoint. What's your take on, I talked to a lot of dairy producers being in the industry all over the world, and especially on larger farms, there's seems to be a little bit of a debate on with all this new information and this new technology, do we manage to the cow or do we manage to the pen? And curious to see what your thoughts are on that, especially around the genetic side of it.
Well, I think that's, when you're managing any dairy, whether it's a smaller dairy or a larger dairy, it's all about the average, right? We're managing to the average, and so sure, individual cows are important, absolutely. And with the data and the information you're going to collect on these cows, you're going to be looking at individual animals. Are they meeting the average or not? If not, why not? But at the same time, you're managing to the pen as well. So we want to make sure that the efficiencies are being done effectively and efficiently as possible. Yeah, and whether you're mating cows or whether you're feeding cows, it's all about averages.
No, I'm curious to see your take on where we've come with genomics, and really how that's impacting or going to impact dairies in the future, and how prevalent you think that's going to become.
Well, I think it's definitely it's here and it's going to continue on. When it started out 10 years ago, I was one of the guys that said that's rubbish, and and it really was in the beginning because we didn't have data. As this database is gaining, as they're collecting more genomic testing and such on animals and individuals, and so we're gaining a database that is actually more efficient and more reliable than it was in the very beginning. So I think that's going to continue. Now, there are certain countries that they still want these proven bulls. They will not have genomics in the country, and that's fine. That's up to them. But I think that with genomics, I think it's going to continue to be refined and go in a direction that can be positive. Hopefully, it will be positive. It could be negative as well. So I hope it stays in a positive direction.
We should probably back up first and say for the audience that doesn't understand genomics, what's the difference between how mating and breeding has been in the past, as you had said, with proven sires versus genomics?
Yeah, so now, it used to be what they called young sires, if you're going to talk about on the genetic side, and that, you had a young sire that was didn't have a proof out yet, didn't have enough daughter data to give them any information. So the timing of that, it takes a lot longer. It would take several years to get that, a daughter proven bull. Now with genomics, you can take the information that, from the dam and from the pedigree base and come up with as it's evolving into more of a higher reliability. So it used to be that, young sires are about a 55 to 60% reliable number, maybe. And then as they got a proof, it would get up into the 90 percentile range. Now, starting off with genomics, you can start out around that 70, 75% reliability point. So 1 out of 4 are going to be, very reliable. So I think that hopefully that kind of helps describe that. And so then, it's like when we talk about this, we talk about if you're going to go to the casino and you're going to gamble. I mean, you want to, you're 1 in 4 of these bulls are not going to turn out. So you don't want to use just one, right? You need to spread your risk. And so look at, 5 bulls, for example, instead of, 3 to 4. So
what other technology do you see really advancing breeding in the genetic side in the dairy industry in the future here?
Breeding wise, I think that so I think that obviously we're going to get into more efficiencies, or, we're going to get into feed efficiencies and conversions. I think are going to be very critical, and they're becoming more relevant. They should have been for a long time. I mean, in the beef industry, they've done it forever, right? They're looking at conversions on how they're converting, every pound of intake to a pound of gain. So in the dairy industry, is kind of lacked in that regard, and so I think that's going to continue in that regard. Is how can we convert every pound of feed that I'm giving this cow to produce a pound of milk? So
you think that was the case in the dairy industry because people just weren't valuing their forages correctly, or they didn't really understand the true value of that, or what was holding the dairy industry back from that in your mind?
I think it's been a structure of how, probably how they were being paid for products that they were selling. And, since that's been changing and it's becoming more and more important to obviously do more with less. And so, I think that's kind of how it's changed in that regard. Why wasn't it sooner? That's a good question. I don't know. Why didn't we, why? So there was a real differential. I mean, it was really, in my days, the beef industry and the dairy industry, chalk and cheese. I mean, they were just totally separate, but really they're all the same, right? And so now with the movement to beef on dairy, it's really brought those two industries a lot closer together and really said, okay, this is how you can make a difference.
Well, speaking of beef on dairy, that's been popular in the U.S. now for a little bit of time. What are you seeing around the rest of the world? Is it really catching on in many other parts of the world?
Yeah, I think so. I think, but the thing is, it's, where they've done well here in the U.S. is they had, in Angus, the brand has done well, and they've branded it well. And the fact that, okay, you can go to, a Burger King or wherever and get an Angus burger. And what qualifies that is, they have to be 50%, I think, so beef on dairy would qualify for Angus, right? But so I think it's been well received in the United States, and there is an opportunity for that Angus or that cross calf, and that it adds value back to the dairy. Now, in other countries, that's not the case. So it may not be Angus, maybe another breed, but it is catching. But the challenge is still what to do with that terminal cross. What are they going to do with that livestock that's going to be, what are they going to do with it? So it's really having that market. And that's where, Angus has done a great job on marketing that side of it for the dairy, really. And it's helped in that regard. So
one other topic that I find really interesting and wanted to get your thoughts on is, as you've traveled in many different markets around the world in the dairy industry, U.S., we're really focused on, just producing a lot of milk products, being able to export. Same thing with New Zealand, some of these other countries, very export focused. You go to Saudi Arabia, they're milking cows for a completely different reason, right? Mm-hmm. So from you as an outsider coming in to talk to them and give them maybe advice on how to manage that, how do you take that into consideration? And what are some of those differences between, an export market like New Zealand and a Saudi Arabian type market?
So really, I think it's how the farm is being paid for their milk. And, what we look at from our side is we look at, okay, how are you getting paid for your milk and why are cows leaving? And then, we develop a plan to help you maximize your facilities out of that in your farms. And so, so it's different in every country, every place you go, how those things happen. And so what you have to, you can't come into the mindset like you talked about, New Zealand or Australia. My first trip to Australia was like, you're like, wow, we got a parlor sitting empty for 22 hours. The parlor was not functional. It's a 60 stall rotary and it's sitting empty for 20 some hours. I'm like, how can you do that? Well, they do that in a whole different way in that, they're milking their cows, they're getting them back on pasture. So it's a different model than what we're used to. And so you can't come in and say, you got to do this or that differently, in that regard. How can we maximize your parlor? Well, how can we maximize your crop production, your pasture base? How can we do that? And so if we can do that, then, we can help you, make more milk if you want or whatever suits your market. Right. So
I would probably consider yourself a teacher more or less in one way or another. Right.
Sure.
So where do you think you got that passion for sharing knowledge? I know you talked about that, a lot of it was just sharing knowledge. Where did you get that passion from?
Well, I think, to be honest, when my dad, how he managed people, in my opinion, was not good. And so what I wanted to learn when I went to Georgia was how to do better at that. How can I be better at managing people? And what I learned is that sharing your knowledge is a critical point in that. And I don't know. I think if you look at our family, I mean, my grandmother is a school teacher. My mom's a school teacher, or was. She's retired now. My youngest sister is a school teacher. My daughter went into the teaching. So I think some of that is kind of in you, embedded in you, and that some people can do it, some people can't. And I really enjoy sharing my knowledge base with people to help them be better. And again, I think for me, not as when I was managing dairy, the more that you would know, the less I would have to do, and the more I could spend time, doing what I do better, which is, managing the operation. And so I saw that as an opportunity to share. So,
what's one of your most memorable teaching moments that you've had? Can you think of one off the top of your head that you saw somebody, you taught them and they really got it and it just hit you really hard? Like, wow, that person just got it. I just passed. I feel like I just passed that on to them. I understand that they understand.
It's been a couple, actually. You sent those questions out earlier, and I've had some time to reflect on that a little bit. And I think there's a few. There's a gentleman that he worked with me in Georgia, and he was born and raised with rabbits, and now he's working on a dairy. And so for me, sharing my experiences, my knowledge with him, and he went from, a rabbit farmer to managing a large dairy, that made you feel good. There's another instances here in Michigan where there was another young man that was just out of high school, and a couple of them actually, and they've gone on to manage some bigger operations around here. Another experience I had was in Wisconsin, and on the farm. It was an interesting farm, and the son had came back and just helping him, taking his no knowledge of cows. He didn't have a cow-based knowledge. He was born, they had a dairy, but he didn't spend a lot of time on the dairy. He was in the financial industry, and just working with him and taking his understanding of, the need for systems, routines, and protocols. Obviously, from the financial side, it's got to be, all your I's and stuff got to be dotted and T's crossed. Taking that to the dairy and actually taking that and seeing that really go, that was a great experience for me. Is that, what, he took it at the next level. Now, there was some times we butted heads, and but it was interesting that how that came through. So.
But you mentioned taking a farm to the next level several times as we've been talking here. In your mind, the successful dairy farm of today, what are they going to need to do to be successful in the future?
Well, I think they have to be willing to change. The 7 most expensive words are, we've always done it that way. And so if you're not willing to change, then I don't, that's going to be the biggest challenge, right? So you've got to change. Now, whether that's, the thing that kind of bothers me a little bit about the United States is that we don't really have opportunities for the small dairies anymore. It's more geared towards the larger operations, and that's sad. So hopefully we can get back to a point where we're, kind of can accommodate those smaller operations, and that they want to, do that. But to do it, you're going to have to be involved with other things, right? So whether it's, bottling your own milk or doing something, a niche on that. So, I would think that, I guess to answer your question, then you're going to have to be ready, willing to change and willing to embrace technology. AI technology is going to be a part of what we do. And it's going to be not only, on the computer side, but also going to be in the cow side. There's going to be more of that technology become available. So being able to understand that and work with that, I think, is going to be important.
Well, Eric, I appreciate you being on here and sharing your wisdom of many years in the dairy industry. If people want to get a hold of Alta or understand what you do more of, what's the best way to do that?
Well, they can reach out to our team or myself directly. My email address or WhatsApp.
All right. Thanks, Eric, for being here today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoy the time together. It's great to see you again and get back acquainted and look forward to see more of these things in the future.
Well, once again, thanks for listening to another episode of the AgCulture Podcast. Really appreciate you listening. Hope you enjoyed this interview with Eric McNeilly. And if you found it interesting, somebody that would also find this interesting, please share it with them. And that's how we grow our audience here at the AgCulture Podcast. We really appreciate it if you share this podcast with others. And again, check out our show notes for ways to connect with Eric or Alta Genetics if you're interested to see the work that they're doing in a global scale. And if you could leave a rating and review, we really appreciate that as well. So until next week, I'm Paul Windemaller, and thanks for listening to another episode of the AgCulture Podcast.